A quiet evening had settled over the city as the tall glass doors of the luxury hotel opened. Inside, the lobby sparkled with soft golden lights, polished marble floors, and the sound of gentle music playing in the background. Guests moved in and out, some chatting, some checking in, while staff members stood at the counters, smiling politely at those they wished to impress. Through those doors walked a woman who carried herself with grace and calm. She was older, her hair silver in places, but her presence was strong, the kind that made people turn their heads without even knowing why. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and in her hand was a small travel bag. To the staff, she looked like just another guest, someone ordinary. But what no one in that lobby knew was that she was the owner of the entire hotel. Every shining light above, every soft sofa in the lounge, every paycheck the staff received, all of it was connected to her. She was the senior black CEO who had built her empire with years of struggle, patience, and brilliance. She walked toward the reception desk with quiet dignity. The click of her shoes echoed softly against the marble floor. Her eyes took in the beauty of the lobby she had designed years ago when the hotel was just an idea in her mind. She felt proud. This place was supposed to be a symbol of hospitality, a place where every guest would feel welcome and respected. Little did she know, she was about to face the opposite. The receptionist behind the counter glanced at her briefly, then looked away as if she wasn't important. The CEO didn't notice. The slight yet, because she was tired from her long day. She had just come back from meetings and wanted nothing more than to rest in one of the rooms she technically owned. She approached the counter with a kind smile and said softly, "Good evening. I'd like to book a room, please." A receptionist didn't return the smile. Instead, there was a quick exchange of looks between two staff members. They whispered something to each other, and the CEO caught a glimpse of their smirks. Still, she stayed calm, expecting professionalism. After all, she believed in giving people the chance to do the right thing. Around her, other guests checked in easily. They were greeted warmly, offered water, or a friendly word. But when it came to her, the tone was different, colder, distant. She began to notice the difference. The staff typed something on the computer, their fingers moving slowly. And then, one of them finally looked up at her. "We don't have any rooms available," the receptionist said flatly. The CEO's eyebrows rose slightly. She knew that wasn't true. She had the records of the hotel memorized. There were always rooms set aside for walk-in guests. Even now, she could see on the glowing screen behind the counter that several rooms were empty. But she didn't say anything yet. Instead, she replied gently, "Are you sure? I only need one night. I don't mind the type of room." The receptionist didn't meet her eyes. "Sorry, we're fully booked." Her calm smile stayed, but inside she felt a shift. A small storm started brewing in her chest. She could sense the dismissal in their tone, the way they looked at her as if she did not belong in a place like this. It was not about rooms, it was about her. For a moment, she considered leaving it there, simply walking away. But this was her hotel, her vision, her name behind the company. To be treated like this in her own empire was not something she could ignore. She stood a little taller, her eyes sharper now. Though her voice remained calm, the people in the lobby continued to move about, unaware of the quiet battle unfolding at the reception desk. Some guests noticed the staff's cold behavior, but chose to look away, not wanting to get involved. The CEO noticed at all the glances, the silence, the way some people avoided eye contact. She placed her bag gently on the counter and folded her hands. She was patient, but she was no fool. Something was very wrong here. The very place she built to be welcoming had become a place where someone like her was denied even a room. And so she waited, giving the staff one last chance to correct themselves, to show respect. But deep down, she already knew this was only The beginning of a story that would end very differently than the staff expected, because what they didn't realize was that the woman standing in front of them was not powerless. She was not someone who could be pushed aside. She was the woman who owned the building they worked in, the salaries they depended on, and the brand they claimed to represent. Her silence in that moment was not weakness. It was the calm before the storm. The receptionist's words hung in the air like a stone dropping into a still pond. "We don't have any rooms available." The senior black CEO blinked slowly, her face calm, but inside her mind, questions were racing. This couldn't be true. She had built this hotel with her own vision, her own determination. She knew every detail about how it was run, from the way guests were welcomed to the number of rooms left open for last-minute reservations. Still, she gave the staff member the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe this young employee was new, nervous, or simply making a mistake. So she leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but clear. "Are you certain? I only need one night. Any room will do. A small one, a simple one, it doesn't matter. I just need a place to rest." The receptionist's eyes flickered briefly toward her, then away again. He shifted uncomfortably, but his voice grew even colder. "I said, we're full. No rooms. Try somewhere else." It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Sharp, dismissive, as though speaking to someone unworthy of standing at that counter. The CEO noticed another guest walking up to the desk just then. A young man in an expensive suit. The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly. His voice softened, his face brightened into a professional smile. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation with us?" The man shook his head. "Oh, but do you have anything available for tonight?" Without hesitation, the receptionist tapped on the keyboard, nodded, and said, "Of course, we do have a few suites left. Let me prepare your key card." The CEO watched quietly, her chest tightening. She had just been told no rooms existed, and yet here, within seconds, the truth was revealed. Rooms were available. The difference was not about availability. The difference was about her. She stood silently as the young man was given his key card and directed toward the elevator with a cheerful smile. The receptionist didn't even glance back at her until she softly cleared her throat. "Excuse me?" she said gently, though her eyes held steady. "You told me there were no rooms left, but you just gave one away." The receptionist's smile vanished instantly. He stiffened, his tone sharp again. "That was a special case. Those suites are not for everyone." His eyes swept over her, full of silent judgment. "Besides, you wouldn't be comfortable here. Perhaps you'd be happier somewhere, more suitable." The words cut like a knife. He didn't say it outright, but the meaning was clear. To him, she did not belong in this shining, polished world. He looked at her silver hair, her skin color, her simple attire, and decided she was not the kind of guest he wanted in this place. For a moment, the CEO felt the sting of humiliation. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she tried to keep her composure. She had spent decades fighting through boardrooms where she was underestimated. She had stood in front of investors who doubted her abilities simply because of who she was. And here, in the hotel she had poured her soul into, she was facing the same prejudice again. But unlike those boardrooms, this was her ground, her empire. And this insult would not stand. A couple nearby had overheard the exchange. The wife nudged her husband, whispering, "Did you hear that?" He just lied to her. The husband frowned, but said nothing, turning his gaze away. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending not to notice the injustice happening right in front of them. The CEO, however, was not one to beg or plead. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes sharper now, and spoke with quiet authority. "Are you telling me that your hotel refuses to serve me?" The receptionist stiffened, again glancing nervously at the other staff member beside him. She avoided eye contact, pretending to busy herself with papers. But the man behind the desk doubled down, his arrogance growing. "That's right. We have the right to refuse service. You should try somewhere else." Oh. His words were final, spoken like a victory, as if he had just defended his territory against an unworthy intruder. The CEO didn't move right away. She stood still, her hands resting calmly on the counter, her eyes locked on his. Her silence was powerful, almost unnerving. It wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the silence before a storm. Inside, her thoughts were clear. So this is how my hotel treats people. This is how my staff judges who deserves a room and who doesn't. She felt a wave of disappointment, but behind it came a stronger wave of resolve. She wasn't going to shout or argue. That wasn't her way. True power didn't need to raise its voice. True power simply revealed itself at the right moment, and when it did, everything changed. For now, she let the young man bask in his false sense of authority. He thought he had dismissed her, turned her away like a nobody. What he didn't know was that the woman standing in front of him could change his life with a single phone call. The CEO slowly picked up her small travel bag from the counter. Her face remained calm, her posture unshaken, but her eyes carried a fire that the staff could not yet understand. The receptionist, misreading her silence, smirked slightly, as though proud of what he had done. He thought the problem was over, that this woman would walk away quietly. But what he failed to realize was this was only the beginning. Because the woman he had just refused service to was not a powerless stranger. She was the senior black CEO who owned the very walls around him, the marble floors beneath his feet, and the company that paid his wages. And very soon, he would regret every word he had just spoken. The lobby air felt heavier after the refusal. The senior black CEO stood quietly, her bag in hand, her eyes steady on the man behind the counter. Most people, after being turned away twice, would have lowered their head and left. But she wasn't most people. She had faced bigger storms in her life than an arrogant receptionist. Still, she wanted to give them one last chance. Perhaps, just perhaps, they would correct themselves before it was too late. She leaned forward slightly, her voice still calm, but firmer this time. "Listen carefully," she said softly. "I don't need a fancy suite. I don't need luxury. I just need one room. Any room. Even the smallest, simplest one. I am willing to pay in full right now. Are you absolutely sure you have nothing?" The receptionist froze for a moment. He wasn't expecting her to be this composed. Most people would have walked away by now, embarrassed. But her calm confidence unsettled him. He cleared his throat, avoided her eyes, and started typing something on his keyboard. The screen glowed, showing clearly that rooms were available. But he knew what he wanted to say before he even looked. "We are still full," he said flatly. Then quickly added, "Even if we had a room, our policy requires a certain standard. We cannot just give rooms to everyone." That word, everyone, hung in the air like a slap. It wasn't about policy. It wasn't about availability. It was about her. The CEO tilted her head slightly, studying him. "A certain standard," she repeated. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp, piercing. "Yes," the receptionist replied, his arrogance creeping back into his tone. "Our hotel has an image to maintain. Not everyone fits." He let the sentence trail off, but his meaning was clear. The other staff member at the desk shifted uncomfortably, pretending to be busy with papers. She avoided looking at the CEO, but her silence spoke volumes. she wasn't going to defend. Her colleague, she wasn't going to correct him. She was going to let the insult stand. The CEO took a slow breath. She remembered moments in her career when investors had told her she wasn't the right face for leadership. She remembered doors being closed in her face, contracts given to others less capable, simply because she didn't match their picture of power. She thought those days were behind her. But here, in her own hotel, history was repeating itself. The excuses didn't stop there. The receptionist straightened his tie and added quickly, "Besides, we have strict booking rules. People usually make reservations in advance. Walk-in guests are complicated. It's not our fault. It's just how things are done." The CEO let out a soft laugh, quiet, almost sad. "Complicated," she said slowly. "So complicated that you gave a room to the gentleman in the suit just minutes ago." The receptionist's face flushed red. He hadn't expected her to notice. He stumbled over his words, searching for another excuse. "That was different," he muttered. He looked like the type of guest who belongs here. Belongs here. Those words cut deeper than any refusal. They revealed the truth. To him, she didn't belong. To him, her age, her skin, her presence marked her as out of place in the shining marble lobby she herself had built. The CEO's lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement, but of disappointment. "So let me understand," she said softly. "You have rooms, but you will not give me one, not because of availability, not because of policy, but because, in your eyes, I do not belong." The receptionist didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. Other guests nearby were watching now. Some whispered to each other, uneasy. They had seen the truth too, but like many, they preferred to stay quiet. Speaking up meant drawing attention to themselves. And most people feared that the CEO, however, had never been afraid of standing alone. She leaned closer, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Do you realize what you are saying? Do you realize the harm in your words?" But the man behind the desk only shrugged. His arrogance blinded him. "I'm just doing my job. You can complain if you want, but the policy is the policy." The CEO straightened again, lifting her bag from the counter. Her face remained calm, but her eyes told another story. She was not defeated. She was not leaving in shame. She was only waiting for the right moment to show this man just how wrong he was. The receptionist mistook her silence for surrender. He smirked faintly, whispering to the other staff member, "She leaves soon." He thought he had won, that he had protected the image of the hotel by pushing her out. But what he didn't know was that the woman he had just insulted wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't just a guest seeking shelter. She was the owner, the power behind the glass walls and chandeliers. And when she revealed the truth, his excuses would crumble into nothing. For now, though, she let him bask in his false victory. Because the sweetest justice is not in shouting or begging, it is in showing. And very soon, his excuses would become his downfall. Asterisk, the words of the receptionist echoed through the lobby. Like a cruel bell, "You don't belong here." For a moment, the senior black CEO stood still, her travel bag in her hand, her back straight, her face calm. On the surface, she looked unshaken. But inside, something deeper stirred, heavy mix of sadness, anger, and disappointment. This hotel wasn't just another building in the city. It wasn't just another business in her long list of successes. This hotel was her dream turned into stone and glass. She had built it not just to make money, but to create a place of welcome, a place where people of all backgrounds could feel at home. She had designed every corner with care, from the golden lights to the velvet chairs in the lounge. Yet here, she was, standing inside her very own creation, being told she wasn't good enough for it. The humiliation wasn't in the denial alone. It was in the way the receptionist spoke to her with that smirk, with those dismissive eyes, as if she were invisible. As if her years of success, her hard work, and her very dignity meant nothing. Other guests began to notice. A woman sitting nearby clutched her pearls, whispering to her husband, "Why are they treating her like that?" The husband shook his head, muttering, "Don't get involved." Their eyes drifted away, pretending not to see. That was the worst part. People saw injustice, but chose silence. Afraid to stand out, a young employee passing through the lobby glanced at the scene and quickly looked down, afraid of being caught watching. Few guests exchanged awkward looks, but stayed seated, sipping their drinks as if nothing had happened. The humiliation was public, and that made it sharper, heavier, almost unbearable. The CEO could feel the weight of every stare on her back. She had been humiliated in private boardrooms before, but public humiliation cut differently. It was meant to break a person, to strip away their pride in front of others. The receptionist leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought he had put her in her place. His voice carried loudly across the lobby as he said, "There's nothing more we can do for you, ma'am. Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We serve guests who match the standard of this hotel." The words were sharper than knives. They weren't just meant to deny her a room, they were meant to make her feel small, lesser, undeserving. The CEO closed her eyes for a brief second. In that silence, she remembered the struggles of her past, the nights she had stayed up working on business plans no one believed in. The time she had been told people like you would never lead a company, the way she had been forced to prove her worth again and again. And now, after building an empire, she stood in her own empire, being told she wasn't worthy. But what the receptionist didn't know was that this humiliation would not break her. No, it would only set the stage for his downfall. Still, the pain of the moment was real. She could feel the stares, the whispers, the judgment pressing against her like heavy walls. It was as though the staff had stripped her of her identity and forced her to stand there as a nobody. And that was the cruelest part, being treated as invisible in a place where she should have been the most visible. She noticed one older couple sitting by the fireplace. The woman looked at her with sympathy, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak up. But her husband touched her arm, shaking his head. "Not our business," he whispered. The woman lowered her eyes. Silence again. The CEO took a slow, steady breath. Every second felt like a test of her patience, a test of whether she would lash out or keep her composure. But she had learned long ago that dignity was her greatest weapon. Shouting would only give them satisfaction. But silence carried power when it was backed by truth. The humiliation deepened when another guest walked in, dragging a suitcase. He approached the same receptionist, asking for a room. Without hesitation, the staff member smiled, clicked the keyboard, and said, "Of course, sir. We have several options available for you tonight." The CEO watched this exchange, her heart tightening again. He was giving away rooms freely, happily, while she was being turned away like an unwanted intruder. It was no longer just discrimination. It was a deliberate act of rejection in front of an audience. Her humiliation was now complete. She stood there, denied, dismissed, disrespected, while others watched silently, while others were served with smiles. But here was the truth. Humiliation doesn't always end in defeat. Sometimes, humiliation becomes the spark that lights a fire. Sometimes, humiliation is the seed of justice. The CEO picked up her travel bag again. She turned slightly, scanning the lobby, meeting the eyes of a few guests. Some looked away instantly, ashamed of their silence. Others stared back with curiosity, wondering why this older woman didn't just leave. But she wasn't going to leave. She didn't say a word to the receptionist. she didn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her protest. She simply stood taller, her silence heavier than any argument. Her eyes locked onto his for a moment longer, and for the first time he shifted in his seat. Uncomfortable under the weight of her calm power. The humiliation had been real. The wound was fresh. But little did the staff know would not end here. Because humiliation, when faced by someone with true power, always turns into something else. It turns into justice. And in just a few moments, the people who had mocked her dismissed her and pushed her aside would come to regret it instantly. The senior black CEO stood silently in the grand lobby, her bag resting at her side, her eyes calm but steady. She had just been refused again, humiliated in front of strangers, treated like she didn't belong in her own empire. The staff smirked, the guests whispered, and the air was heavy with tension. But she was not a woman who bent easily. Taught her how to fight battles with patience, how to stay silent until the silence itself became louder than any voice. And in that moment, though her silence looked like defeat to the arrogant receptionist, it was not weakness, it was strategy. She reached into her bag slowly, pulled out her sleek black phone, and with steady fingers, she dialed a number. Her tone remained calm, as if she were simply making a casual call, but her words carried a quiet power. "Yes," she said softly into the phone. "It's me. Come to the lobby right now." Stray ended the call without saying another word. No explanation, no raised voice, no drama. Just 5 quiet words that would change everything. The receptionist frowned, curious. He leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "What's she doing? Calling her ride?" They chuckled under their breath, still thinking they had one. Still blind to the storm that was about to hit them. The CEO placed the phone back in her bag and stood tall, her eyes fixed on the grand staircase at the far end of the lobby. She waited. Minutes passed slowly, but her patience was endless. Every tick of the clock only made the tension sharper then. Suddenly, the glass doors of the hotel opened with a rush of air, and the general manager hurried inside. He was a tall man in a dark suit, usually composed and confident, but tonight his face was pale. His steps quick, almost frantic. His eyes scanned the lobby until they landed on her. The moment he saw her standing there, his entire expression changed. His lips parted, his shoulders stiffened, and sweat formed instantly on his forehead. He rushed forward, his polished shoes tapping nervously on the marble floor. "Ma'am," he said breathlessly, his voice trembling. "What happened? Why didn't anyone inform me you had arrived?" The receptionist's smirk froze. His laughter died in his throat. He blinked, looking back and forth between the general manager and the woman he had just mocked. Confusion spread across his face. "Wait, you know her?" he stammered. The general manager turned sharply, his eyes blazing with anger. "Know her." His voice boomed across the lobby, catching the attention of every guest. "This woman is not just any guest. She is the owner of this hotel. The senior black CEO who built this empire with her own hands." Gasps rippled through the lobby. Guests who had been whispering now leaned forward in shock. The young man who had just checked into his suite froze mid-step, staring back in disbelief. Even the staff member beside the receptionist covered her mouth, her face draining of color. The receptionist, however, turned pale as a sheet. His hands trembled on the desk, his eyes wide with horror. The weight of what he had done crushed him instantly. Every cruel word he had spoken, every arrogant smirk, every lie about the rooms being full-lit, all came rushing back to him. And now he realized who he had spoken them to. The CEO didn't need to raise her voice. She stood quietly, watching as the truth sank into the faces around her. Her silence was louder than thunder now. and her presence filled the lobby like a storm cloud ready to burst. The general manager spun toward the staff. His voice thundered. "How dare you treat her this way? Do you understand whose presence you are in? Every paycheck you earn comes from her. Every brick in this building exists because of her. And you dare deny her a room? You dare humiliate her in her own house." The receptionist's lips quivered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He stammered, I didn't know. I thought you thought wrong." The general manager snapped, cutting him off sharply. His anger filled the lobby. But even his fury could not match the quiet authority of the CEO herself. She finally spoke, her voice calm but razor sharp. "It is not about whether you knew me. It is about respect. If I had been anyone else tonight, would you still have treated them this way? How many others have you humiliated because they didn't look the part?" Her words struck like lightning. Guests nodded quietly, whispering among themselves. They realized this wasn't just about a CEO being insulted, it was about a deeper truth, a reflection of how people are often judged unfairly. The receptionist lowered his head. His arrogance gone, replaced with shame. But the damage was already done. His excuses, his smirks, his lies, they were now his chains. The CEO lifted her bag slowly and placed it back on the counter. "You told me there were no rooms. And yet, I see rooms are available. Tell me how. Do you explain that?" The receptionist's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His colleague looked away, too ashamed to speak. The CEO didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she turned her eyes to the general manager. "Handle it," she said simply. Those two words carried more weight than 1,000 shouted orders. The general manager bowed his head, trembling. "Yes, ma'am." Immediately, he snapped his fingers, and within seconds, senior staff members rushed into the lobby. They whispered urgently to one another, their faces pale as they realized what had happened. The receptionist who had dared to mock her was pulled aside, his protests falling flat against the storm of consequences rushing toward him. The CEO stood silently, watching the chaos unfold. She did not need to raise her hand. She did not need to lift her voice. Her very presence was enough. The truth had been revealed, and now justice was beginning. The guests in the lobby began to clap softly, the sound growing louder as more joined in. They weren't just applauding her power, they were applauding her composure, her strength, her dignity in the face of humiliation. The receptionist, once so arrogant, now stood small, broken, humiliated himself. His excuses had melted into silence, his lies exposed under the bright lights of truth. And the CEO. She remained calm, steady, and unshaken. Because this was only the beginning of her lesson. The reveal had begun. And from this moment forward, the hotel staff would never forget the day they underestimated the woman who owned the very ground they stood on. The lobby was no longer the same. Moments ago, it had been filled with whispers, smirks, and humiliation. Now it was filled with silence, so heavy that every breath could be heard. The truth had been spoken. The woman they had denied, dismissed, and insulted was not just another guest. She was the senior black CEO, the very owner of the hotel itself. The receptionist who had refused her stood frozen, his face drained of color. He felt his knees weaken as the reality hit him. His mind replayed every word he had spoken to her. "We're full. People like you don't fit here. Try somewhere else." What had once been arrogance now felt like poison in his throat. The general manager's words still echoed through the lobby like thunder. "This woman is the reason you have a job. This is her house, her empire. You humiliated her in her own hotel." The staff, who had stood silently before, now lowered their heads, ashamed. Their eyes avoided hers, afraid to meet the gaze of the woman they had wronged. Guests whispered loudly now, their voices filled with disbelief. "She's the owner." One woman gasped, clutching her purse. "All this time, and they treated her like that." Another man muttered, "They'll regret this." "Oh, they'll regret it." Someone else whispered. The receptionist's chest tightened. Sweat rolled down his back, and his hands trembled. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but his lips refused to form words. He looked at his colleague, desperate for support, but she only stepped back, distancing herself from him as if his shame would stain her too. The CEO, however, stood tall and calm. Her eyes held no anger, only a deep disappointment that cut sharper than rage. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence was enough to crush the arrogance out of the man who had humiliated her. Finally, he tried to stammer out words. "Ma'am, I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were. Please." But the general manager cut him off with a sharp glare. "That is the problem. It should not matter who she is. She is a guest. She is a human being. And you denied her dignity. Do you think this hotel's reputation is built on chandeliers and marble floors? No, it is built on respect, and you failed." The receptionist's mouth fell shut. His excuses, once spoken with pride, now turned into chains that dragged him down in front of everyone. The smug expression that had lived on his face was gone, replaced with raw fear. The CEO finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the air like glass. "You looked at me and decided I did not belong. You lied about rooms being available. You told me this place was not for people like me. Tell me if I had not revealed who I am tonight. How many others would you continue to treat this way?" Her question was not just for him, was for everyone in the lobby. Her words hung over them like a mirror, forcing them to confront what they had witnessed in silence. Some guests lowered their eyes, ashamed that they had stayed quiet. Others nodded slowly, realizing the deeper truth of her words. The receptionist swallowed hard, his face twisted in shame. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died before they reached his tongue. He had no answer. There was none. The CEO stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone carried a power that made the entire pledge. I played the entire lobby hold its breath. Respect is not given because of titles or wealth. Respect is something every person deserves, no matter their appearance, their age, or the color of their skin. And tonight, you forgot that. The receptionist felt the world closing in on him. His arrogance, his excuses, his false pride, all of it shattered in that moment. What was left was only fear. Fear of losing his job. Fear of losing face. Fear of the woman standing in front of him who held all the power. The general manager barked an order. Security. Two suited men appeared almost instantly, their expressions firm. They moved toward the receptionist, who stumbled back, panic flashing in his eyes. "Wait, please, I didn't mean it. I was just..." But no one listened anymore. His pleas fell flat, too late to undo the humiliation he had caused. The staff who once stood beside him now turned their backs. The guests who once ignored him now stared, their eyes sharp with judgment. The receptionist's arrogance had turned to desperation. The shock of the truth had broken him completely. He realized that in trying to humiliate someone else, he had humiliated himself before the world. The CEO, meanwhile, remained calm, her presence towering above the chaos. She did not smile at his downfall. She did not gloat or celebrate. That was not her way. Her dignity did not need revenge, needed justice. She turned her gaze to the general manager. "Make sure this never happens again," she said softly. The general manager bowed his head quickly, his voice trembling. "Yes, ma'am. It will not. I give you my word." The CEO nodded once, then picked up her travel bag again. With grace and composure, she began walking toward the elevators, her steps firm, her back straight. The lobby watched her in awe. This was not just a businesswoman. This was a queen walking through her kingdom, reminding everyone of who truly held power. Behind her, the receptionist was led away by security, his head hanging low. The shock of the truth had destroyed his pride. He had tried to make her feel small, but in the end, it was he who was made small before the entire hotel. And as the guests whispered among themselves, one thing became clear. They would never forget what they had witnessed tonight. They would tell the story again and again, the story of the woman who walked in quietly, was denied with arrogance, and revealed herself as the true owner of everything around them. The shock had settled. The truth had been spoken. And the hotel would never be the same again. The lobby, once filled with laughter and whispers, had turned into a courtroom without walls. The guilty stood exposed, the truth had been spoken, and now it was time for judgment. The senior black CEO, calm and unshaken, walked back to the center of the lobby. She did not need to shout. Her silence had already silenced everyone else. The receptionist, trembling under the grip of security, begged for mercy. His voice shook as he tried to find words that could save him. "Please, ma'am, I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean it. I was just following policy." The CEO turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto him. Her voice, though quiet, carried through the entire lobby. "You did not refuse me because of policy. You refused me because of prejudice. You lied about the rooms. You humiliated me in front of strangers. And worst of all, you showed the world that this hotel does not respect people equally." Her words struck him harder than any punishment. His knees wobbled. Guests watching nearby nodded in agreement. Some even clapped softly. The humiliation he had given her was now returned tenfold. The general manager, sweating heavily, tried to fix the damage. "Ma'am, I assure you, this will never happen again. I will personally handle the matter." But the CEO lifted her hand, stopping him. "This is not just about one employee. It is about the culture you allow to grow inside this hotel. If one of your staff feels free to treat a guest this way, how many others do the same when no one is watching? How many voices have been silenced? How many guests have left here broken, feeling small because of people like him?" The lobby went silent again. Her words reached deeper than the walls, deeper than the floors. They touched every person standing there, reminding them that respect was not optional. It was the very foundation of humanity. The CEO stepped closer to the receptionist, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You wanted to make me feel small. Instead, you revealed how small your own heart is. And now the consequences are yours to bear." The general manager motioned to security, and the receptionist was escorted out of the lobby, his face pale, his eyes wide with shame. He didn't resist. He knew it was over, but the CEO wasn't finished. She turned to the other staff member who had stood silent during it all. The young woman lowered her head, unable to meet her eyes. The CEO spoke gently but firmly. "Your silence was a choice. When you saw wrong, you looked away. Remember this moment. Silence can wound just as deeply as cruelty." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, whispering, "I'm sorry, ma'am." The CEO gave a slight nod, but her expression remained firm. "Let this be your lesson. Do not ever stay silent in the face of injustice again." The consequences weren't just for the guilty, they were lessons for everyone. The general manager, desperate to restore order, bowed his head. "Please, allow me to escort you to the finest suite we have. It will be prepared immediately." But the CEO shook her head slowly. "I don't want the finest suite. I don't need luxury to prove who I am. I only wanted respect." Tonight, your staff failed to give it to me." Her voice grew stronger now, echoing across the lobby. "From this day forward, I will make sure no guest is ever treated the way I was treated tonight. I will launch a full investigation into how my hotel operates. Every member of staff will undergo training not just in service, but in respect, equality, and dignity. This is not a hotel of exclusion. It is a home of welcome. And anyone who forgets that will no longer work under my name." Applause broke. Out across the lobby, guests who had watched silently now stood, clapping louder and louder. Some even cheered, moved by her words. They weren't just clapping for her, they were clapping for justice. The CEO accepted their applause with quiet dignity. She didn't smile, but her presence commanded respect. She turned back to the general manager and said calmly, "Now prepare me a room not because of who I am, but because I am a guest who deserves the same respect as any other." The general manager bowed deeply. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." He scrambled to the desk, his hands trembling as he personally began the process. He would not allow another mistake. As he worked, the CEO turned once more to the guests watching. Her voice softened, but it carried a weight that lingered in the air. "Remember this night. Not because of me, but because of what it means. Never judge someone by their appearance. Never deny respect to another human being, because you never know who they really are or what power they hold." The guests nodded, murmuring in agreement. Some even filmed the moment, whispering that the world needed to hear this story. The receptionist was gone. The silent staff member had been warned. The general manager had been humbled. And the hotel itself had been changed forever. The consequences had been delivered, not with anger, not with revenge, but with dignity and justice. The CEO finally took her keycard. Offered to her with trembling hands by the general manager himself, she accepted it quietly and began walking toward the elevator. Her steps were slow, steady, full of grace. The crowd parted for her like water before a ship, their eyes following her with awe. And as she entered the elevator, the doors closing softly behind her, one truth remained clear. She had walked into the lobby humiliated, but she left it as a queen. The hotel staff would never forget this night. The guests would never forget this lesson. And the world, once it heard the story, would know that respect is not optionally, is everything. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. But the weight of what had just happened lingered in the lobby like thunder after a storm. Guests still stood frozen, whispering among themselves, replaying the shocking scene in their minds. The receptionist, who had once smirked with arrogance, was gone, escorted out in shame. The general manager still trembled, wiping sweat from his forehead. And the staff, who had remained silent now, carried heavy guilt in their hearts. Upstairs, in the hotel's grand penthouse suite, the senior black CEO placed her small travel bag. On the polished wooden table, the room sparkled with elegant plush carpets, golden lamps, and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Yet none of that mattered to her at the moment. She sank gently into the velvet armchair by the window, her eyes reflecting the glow of the city lights. For a long while, she sat in silence. The events of the evening replayed in her mind, the lies, the smirks, the humiliation. She had walked into the hotel as a guest, only to be treated as if she didn't belong. But she had also walked out of that lobby victorious, not because she revealed her wealth or her power, but because she had held on to her dignity. Her phone buzzed with messages. Word was already spreading. Guests had posted videos online, and social media was filling with shocked comments. People were outraged by what they had seen, but more than that, they were inspired by the way she had handled it. Calm, firm, unshaken. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't insulted, she hadn't lowered herself to their level. Instead, she had taught them a lesson they would never forget. Downstairs, the staff whispered nervously. The general manager began making calls, setting up emergency meetings, already fearing the changes that were about to come. He knew the CEO would not let this pass quietly. She was a woman of action, a woman who believed in justice not just for herself, but for everyone who walked through those hotel doors. And he was right. The next morning, the CEO called the entire hotel staff to the grand conference hall. Every employee, from receptionists to housekeeping to managers, stood nervously in rows, waiting for her to speak. Her presence filled the room the moment she entered. She did not need introductions. Her reputation preceded her now. She stood at the front, her hands clasped gently, her posture straight, her face calm but serious. She looked at each of them, her eyes sharp but not cruel. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, echoing through the hall with quiet power. "Last night, I was treated in a way no guest should ever be treated in this hotel. I was denied respect, denied service, and humiliated not because there were no rooms, but because of prejudice, because of assumptions, because of arrogance. The room was silent. Every word hit like a stone. Employees lowered their eyes, ashamed," she continued. "Some of you may think the receptionist was the only one at fault. But silence is also a choice. Silence allows cruelty to grow. When wrong happens before you and you say nothing, you become part of that wrong." The young woman who had stayed silent at the desk lowered her head, tears forming in her eyes. CEO's gaze softened slightly, but her message remained firm. "This hotel," she said, her voice stronger now, "was not built to be a palace of exclusion. It was built to be a place of welcome, a home for travelers, a safe space for people from every walk of life. If you forget that, you forget why this hotel exists at all. If you forget that, you cannot work here." Her words carried the weight of final judgment. The staff shifted uneasily, some nodding slowly in agreement. They understood now the standard of this hotel was not measured by marble floors or chandeliers, but by the respect they gave to each person who walked inside. She paused, letting her words sink deep into their hearts. Then she added, "From today, things will change. Every single member of staff will undergo training. Not just in service, but in respect, in dignity, in humanity. If you cannot give that, you do not belong here. This is my promise to myself, to you, and to every guest who chooses to stay in this hotel." Applause broke out in the hall. Some clapped hesitantly at first, but then louder and louder as the message sank in. They weren't just applauding her authority, they were applauding her truth. The CEO nodded once, then concluded, "Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of everything. Remember this, never underestimate someone based on their appearance. You may think they are powerless. You may think they don't belong. But greatness often walks quietly. And when you disrespect it, you only bring shame upon yourself." The staff bowed their heads, deeply humbled. The receptionist who had mocked her was gone, but his example would live on forever as a warning to them all. That night, when guests returned to the lobby, the air felt different. The same golden lights sparkled, the same marble floors shined, but something invisible had changed. The staff greeted each person warmly, with genuine respect. There were no whispers, no smirks, no dismissive glances. Every guest, no matter their appearance, was treated with dignity, and as the CEO watched quietly from her suite above, she felt a sense of peace. The pain of humiliation had been real, but it had not broken her. Instead, it had created something greater, transformation. Not just for herself, but for everyone who would ever step foot in that hotel again. The story of that night spread far beyond the walls of the hotel. Newspapers wrote about it, bloggers shared it, and social media exploded with praise. People around the world repeated the story. A senior black CEO walked into her own hotel, was denied a room, and made them regret it instantly. But for her, it wasn't about making them regret. It was about making them learn. Because the true lesson was simple, timeless, and unforgettable. Respect every person you meet. You never know whose presence you are standing in. And with that lesson, her story became more than just a moment of justice. It became an inspiration.